Welcome to a masterclass in exposing the absolute hubris of American military planning. The recent ballistic missile barrage against Prince Sultan Air Base perfectly demonstrates this reality. The Pentagon spent the last several months dropping tens of thousands of guided munitions across the Middle East, heavily altering the desert landscape in a massive campaign designed to permanently eliminate rival launch capabilities. American generals proudly proclaimed complete air supremacy, fully expecting their adversaries to fight using crude, basic rockets. Operating under this extreme overconfidence, the United States Air Force parked their rarest, most expensive $500 million support aircraft right out in the open on the sun-baked tarmac at Al-Kharj. This irreplaceable asset sat completely exposed just over 600 kilometers from the Iranian coastline. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps seized this golden opportunity by launching a synchronized volley of advanced ballistic missiles. These sophisticated munitions traveled the entire distance across the Persian Gulf, threading a microscopic needle directly through the overlapping radar fans of the heavily touted Patriot and THAAD missile defense networks. Those billion-dollar American shield generators spent the attack watching the sky beautifully while the Iranian warheads delivered an explosive payload directly onto the primary flight line of the airbase. The aftermath of this precision strike reveals a catastrophic loss for the American war machine. The attack specifically targeted the absolute backbone of their logistical and command infrastructure. Ground photographs and commercial satellite imagery confirm the total destruction of a highly prized E-3 Sentry airborne warning and control system aircraft. Investigators specifically identified the wreckage as serial number 8100005, bearing the OK tailcode from the 502nd Air Control Wing at Tinker Air Force Base. The images display the utter devastation of the aircraft. The Boeing 707 fuselage rests completely severed in half, with the tail section sitting pathetically on the concrete surrounded by charred debris and a collapsed radar dome support structure. The E-3 Sentry serves as the supreme airborne command center of the entire air war. It utilizes a massive rotating passive electronically scanned array radar dome to track hundreds of targets simultaneously. The crew uses this data to deconflict congested airspace and direct fighter intercepts across the battlespace. It acts as the all-seeing eye of the American military, employing advanced Doppler processing to distinguish low-flying cruise missiles from ground clutter. In addition to this crippling blow, the ballistic missile strike successfully hit the refueling apron, devastating the American tanker fleet. Iranian-released satellite imagery highlights massive blackened scorch marks marking the exact location of a former row of KC-135 Stratotankers. This evidence confirms the total destruction of 3 tankers and heavy damage to at least 5 of these crucial aircraft. The KC-135 serves as the vital fuel artery of the Air Force, delivering the mid-air refueling necessary to keep short-range fighter jets in the sky over distant targets. This calculated strike surgically removes both the eyes and the fuel supply of the American air campaign. By eliminating the E-3 AWACS, Iran successfully blinded the American commanders. This action created massive gaps in airborne radar coverage, allowing future missile salvos to penetrate the airspace completely freely. The loss of a single E-3 inflicts a monumental strategic blow. The United States operates a tiny, aging fleet of these irreplaceable aircraft, with their intended Boeing E-7 wedge-tail successors still trapped in congressional development hell. Simultaneously, the destruction of the KC-135 Stratotanker fleet severely restricts the combat radius of American fighter jets. This logistical nightmare forces commanders to drastically curtail their bombing runs. The Iranian forces completely bypass the heavily armored American strike fighters, opting to perfectly execute a decapitation strike against the soft, slow-moving logistical aircraft, making modern air wars possible. With their forward-deployed tankers turning into molten slag on the Saudi tarmac, the Air Force must now retreat their remaining high-value assets to bases much further away in Qatar or the United Arab Emirates. Relocating these assets extends the transit time for every single combat mission, requiring even more aerial refueling from a tanker fleet suffering from catastrophic losses. Executing a strike with a circular error probable of mere centimeters across such a heavily monitored battlespace requires an absolute mastery of geodetic targeting, real-time synthetic aperture radar, and terminal electro-optical scene matching. The Pentagon insists on blaming Iran for the entire kill chain, giving Tehran fictional credit for possessing a space architecture comparable to a Tier 1 superpower. Analyzing the pure telemetry and optical requirements of such a flawless strike reveals a vast, sophisticated supply chain originating directly in Beijing and Moscow. To understand the sheer mathematical complexity of Iran acting alone, one must examine the actual capabilities of the Iranian Space Agency and the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Space Command. Iran currently operates a modest constellation of indigenously developed low Earth orbit satellites, primarily the Noor series. Engineers built Noor 1, Noor 2, and Noor 3, utilizing basic CubeSat form factors and off-the-shelf commercial components. These platforms orbit at altitudes between 400 and 500 kilometers, carrying rudimentary multispectral imaging payloads. The optical resolution of the Noor platforms bottoms out at roughly 10 to 30 meters per pixel. In the realm of orbital reconnaissance, a 10-meter resolution turns a massive Boeing 7 airframe into a pixelated, ambiguous gray smudge. Targeting an aircraft requires discerning specific physical features, identifying the distinctive radar dome, and confirming the target remains parked in that exact location. A 10-meter pixel completely obscures those critical details, turning the Noor satellites into simple prestige projects suitable only for basic observation. Furthermore, the Iranian space tracking infrastructure suffers from severe latency issues. The telemetry downloaded from a Noor satellite arrives hours after the pass, offering purely historical data of a battlespace changing by the minute. Tehran possesses exactly contabulis. Preparing a ballistic or cruise missile strike requires persistent, continuous monitoring to ensure the multi-million-dollar target remains stationary during the weapon's hour-long flight time. In the event the AWACS taxis to a different hangar between Qayyam's daily passes, the incoming missile strikes empty concrete. Delivering a killing blow demands temporal resolution measured in minutes or hours, a capability resting entirely outside the scope of Iran's solitary high-resolution platform. Beyond the temporal limitations, optical satellites like Qayyam suffer from fundamental atmospheric vulnerabilities. Cloud cover, sandstorms, and specialized military smokescreens easily defeat visible light cameras. The United States military frequently utilizes multispectral camouflage netting and localized atmospheric obscurants to mask high-value assets during periods of known satellite overflights. Overcoming these passive defenses requires synthetic aperture radar. SRR satellites emit microwave pulses penetrating clouds, weather phenomena, and standard camouflage nets, bouncing off the metallic surfaces of parked aircraft to create high-fidelity radar maps of the target area. Iran maintains an exclusively optical space architecture, relying entirely on foreign partners to fulfill their radar requirements. Creating the precise radar-based targeting template required for the missile's onboard terminal guidance system requires active SAR illumination of Prince Sultan Air Base mere hours before the launch. Fulfilling these immense technological requirements points directly toward the massive, state-backed commercial space constellations of the People's Republic of China. Beijing currently operates the Jilin-1 constellation, an absolute behemoth consisting of over 130 high-resolution optical, video, and hyperspectral satellites. This massive swarm of orbital sensors utilizes agile maneuvering thrusters to constantly adjust their viewing angles, providing a temporal resolution making American planners sweat. The Jilin-1 network passes over any given point on the globe multiple times per day, often achieving hourly revisit rates. Chinese operators access continuous, near-real-time streams of high-definition imagery, perfectly tracking the movements, maintenance schedules, and parking habits of every single American aircraft in the Middle East. Furthermore, China deploys advanced SAR satellites like the Gaofen series and the commercial Chaohu-1 platforms. These radar satellites slice right through American camouflage, generating the exact synthetic aperture maps required by modern missile seekers. Chinese military intelligence actively commercializes this data, selling it directly to Iranian front companies and Revolutionary Guard liaisons. By subscribing to these Chinese commercial space providers, Iran gains the real-time, persistent, multispectral targeting capability of a Tier 1 superpower, completely bypassing their own domestic technological limitations. Equally vital to the strike remains the complex science of geodesy, the mathematical mapping of the Earth's exact shape and gravitational variations. A high-resolution photograph merely shows a two-dimensional picture. Converting that picture into a weaponized three-dimensional coordinate requires referencing the image against a highly accurate geodetic datum. The Earth bulges at the equator and features massive gravitational anomalies subtly warping the flight paths of long-range ballistic weapons. The gravitational pull fluctuates significantly depending on the density of the Earth's crust over specific geographic regions. Flying a ballistic trajectory over the Zagros Mountains and across the Persian Gulf involves crossing multiple distinct gravitational zones. Navigating a missile across that massive span of over 600 kilometers to hit a specific 50-meter target requires incredibly precise gravity maps and digital elevation models built using the WGS-84 or PZ-90 geodetic reference systems. The Russian military excels in geodetic science, spending decades mapping the exact gravitational variations of the Middle East. Moscow operates the Condor series of military SAR satellites alongside the massive GLONASS navigational constellation. Russian military intelligence actively shares these classified digital elevation models and precise gravitational maps with Tehran. When Iranian engineers program the flight computer of an advanced precision munition, they input coordinates derived directly from Russian geodetic surveys, ensuring the missile flies true despite the Earth's natural variations. An inertial navigation system relies on ultra-precise laser ring gyroscopes to calculate movement from a known starting point. Over an approximate 600-kilometer flight path, minor physical vibrations, subtle temperature fluctuations, and the Coriolis effect cause these gyros to accumulate mathematical drift. A missile relying purely on internal gyroscopes arrives at the target area tens or hundreds of meters off course. Correcting this drift requires continuous updates from a global navigation satellite system. The American military routinely jams and spoofs their own global positioning system signals across the Middle East to confuse incoming threats. The incoming munitions abandon the American GPS network entirely, tuning their receivers exclusively to the Chinese Beidou and Russian GLONASS constellations. Beidou offers incredibly strong regional signals specifically designed to overpower local electronic warfare interference. The missile flight computer ingests these Beidou signals, correcting its gyroscopic drift every fraction of a second, perfectly maintaining its lethal trajectory right through the American electronic countermeasures. The Pentagon spends billions trying to hide their bases in the electromagnetic spectrum, while the enemy simply utilizes a different brand of satellite. Consider the specific physics of electro-optical targeting at hypersonic speeds. The terminal phase lasts mere seconds. The munition descends through the atmosphere, generating intense friction and plasma sheaths, distorting standard optics. To successfully identify a parked aircraft, the missile requires a hyperspectral template, a multi-layered image detailing the exact infrared signature and specific radar reflectivity of the target. Chinese space assets provide these specific hyperspectral bands. A standard photograph shows a white plane on gray concrete. A hyperspectral image reveals the exact chemical composition of the jet fuel inside the wings and the distinct thermal signature of the auxiliary power unit. The Iranian missile seeker arrives equipped with algorithms designed to process this specific Chinese hyperspectral data. It compares the real-time heat bloom of the target against the downloaded Beijing data package, instantly confirming the identity of the E-3 Sentry among dozens of other parked aircraft and decoy structures. This level of discrimination requires processing power and sensor data historically reserved for Tier 1 superpowers, now available as a downloadable package from Eurasian partners. The digital scene matching area correlator represents the pinnacle of this integrated strike package. This onboard optical computer acts as the final arbiter of truth for the incoming warhead. As the weapon enters the terminal dive at Mach 5 or higher, a motorized shutter exposes a high-speed camera protected by a sapphire glass window, instantly feeding visual frames into a localized neural network. This processor rapidly transforms the chaotic live imagery into a simplified high-contrast mathematical map, highlighting the rigid geometric lines of the tarmac, the distinct curved radome of the E-3 Sentry, and the precise angles of the adjacent hangars. It continuously aligns this live geometry against the imported Russian SAR-action Chinese hyperspectral templates. The algorithm searches for a mathematical convergence, calculating the exact probability that the geometry in the camera matches the geometry in the memory banks. Once the confidence score exceeds the pre-programmed threshold, the weapon commits to the final maneuvering burn, locking its control surfaces into a terminal trajectory. The American electronic warfare planes above the battlefield emit massive blasts of broad-spectrum interference, attempting to fry the guidance computer, while the scene-matching correlator relies entirely on passive optical data, rendering the expensive American jamming pods entirely superficial. The munition simply uses its eyes to find the target, guided by the flawless orbital intelligence provided by its Eurasian benefactors. The Pentagon completely misunderstood the modern battlespace by treating Iran as an isolated, technologically inferior adversary. The generals deployed their most valuable command aircraft into a static base, perfectly confident in their billion-dollar air defense network spanning the eastern coastline. They overlooked the fundamental reality of the modern multipolar world. When dealing with Tehran, the American military actively fights the combined orbital might of the entire Eurasian bloc. Beijing supplies the persistent hourly optical tracking and synthetic aperture radar mapping. Moscow provides the underlying geodetic mathematics, the gravitational maps, and the high-resolution Canopus V imagery. Iran provides the geographic launch point, the solid rotten motors, and the political will to pull the trigger. The resulting weapon system achieves terrifying precision, entirely capable of threading a needle across well over 600 kilometers of heavily monitored airspace. American military doctrine remains hopelessly paralyzed by this new reality. The commanders parked an irreplaceable aging Boeing airframe in an open desert, expecting the enemy to fight using crude basic rockets. The United States Air Force currently faces a future where their massive, slow-moving surveillance planes serve as easy practice targets for a fully integrated Chinese and Russian-backed kill chain. Every single static asset sitting on an allied runway from Qatar to Saudi Arabia currently rests firmly within the crosshairs of this collaborative orbital network. The era of unquestioned American sanctuary behind Patriot batteries vanished the moment Chinese commercial satellites began feeding real-time targeting telemetry to Iranian missile silos. The greatest superpower on the planet gets to watch its multi-million-dollar radar fleet evaporate, utterly outplayed by a coalition utilizing commercially available space technology and shared geodetic mathematics to rewrite the rules of modern warfare.